Hello, welcome to another speed lapse of me building a screen from scratch. In this video I will be covering retexturing assets, using DForce to create new surfaces and editing existing assets into the scene. These videos are intended more for entertainment rather than a specific tutorial. However, you can slow down the footage and see for yourself how I achieve these results. Fair warning, due to the jumpy nature as I work, the video might be a little jarring to watch. Where possible, I do try to minimise this effect. The scene I'm creating is a Halloween themed image. In my mind I had a rough sketch of heads on pikes in front of an old style church or building. I hope you enjoy the video and find it informative as well. Before I start explaining what's on the screen, I want to thank all those who support my work both here on YouTube and those supporting me directly on Patreon. November and December will be busy months as I gear up to release the next update to Dreams of Reality. If you like what you see, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. My upload schedule is sporadic, so this helps notify you when I next upload. Now let's speed this up. I want to create a ground for the church to sit on. Using these rock assets, I can scale them up and use them as a base. It doesn't matter if the texture of the rock is stretched, as I will be covering these with a different surface. To give the idea of one continuous surface, I load a plane with around 100 divisions, add a DForce modifier to it, and position the plane above the rocks I wish to cover. Running the simulation allows the plane to drape over the rocks. This allows you to remove the rock assets, thus freeing up VRAM, but also gives a better surface to work with. Just remember to freeze the simulation for the plane if you intend to simulate something else later. Once I have the plane in place, I want to add a ground texture to it. I like the dark texture of this estate ground asset. Loading it into the scene will load its textures as well. I can confirm the name of the texture used, and then selecting the plane, change the base image to the same texture. I liked the look of the grass here, so I decided to take that and use it as well. With some scale adjustments, I move it into position on the hilltop. I already have a camera angle in mind as I work, so as I add each item to the scene, I keep checking how this will look from that angle. This also helps reduce the amount of time spent working on an area that will be outside of the final rendered image. Take for example those creases in the plane at the edges. They will either be covered up or outside the rendered image, so I'm not going to spend time trying to correct them. Adding more ground textures, I noticed this has not been converted over to use the iRay shader. I can see this by the use of diffuse colour instead of base colour. This is easily remedied by selecting the surface in the editor tab, then going to presets, shaders and double clicking the iRay Uber base. With this done, I can now morph the ground to create two grave sites. This church asset seemed to fit the theme, so again, checking my planned camera angle, I move it into position. I also add some additional decorations, a couple of gravestones, scaling these as required. I also add in some more ground texture to fill in any gaps that need it. Again, using the DForce method from earlier, I drape a second plane over the rock and give it its texture. Grouping assets together and naming them something appropriate can really help you navigate the scene. Additionally, it keeps the scene tab on the left easier to navigate as well. Here, I'm setting the resolution and aspect ratio I want the final image to be. Framing is an important step in creating images, At a very basic level, you want to consider three things: foreground, middle ground and distance. Right now we have nothing in the foreground. The graves and gravestones make up the middle, as does the church, though this could also be included as distance. I'm adjusting the scaling of the church as I want more of it to be in the image. With the general ground area completed, I need to block off the image to the right. I can do this by using some wall assets. I'm grouping these wall assets together, as once I have them aligned with each other how I want, I can then move the group, keeping that alignment intact, moving them as one entire wall instead of separated. I've added a default Gen 3 model, the closer to keep it YouTube safe. When you have graves, you of course need to have a zombified hand coming out of them. It just wouldn't be a Halloween image without it. As the body will never be seen, I can position the model under the ground with her arm reaching up. I add a rough texture to it as well, though I suspect in the final image this is probably too small a detail to see. With a final check of the framing, I import an asset I worked on previously. Yes, Cindy's head on a stick. I did this off camera. It's built by combining a post asset scaled down with a cone created for on top. The cone was then resurfaced with a stick texture. Using the layered image editor, I added a blood effect. I did this to both the post and the cone. To remove Cindy's head, there's an asset that can hide the body. It can also add a bloody stump and some blood effects if required. I gave her some face makeup and attempted a dead expression, which surprisingly was not the default one they all load in with. Stick her in the ground and let's see how it looks. One head is not enough, I want to add more. With the post selected, I create two more node instances. These are copies of the original and inherit the same properties. This is useful as not only do node instances use less video memory, any changes you make to the original is transferred to the node instances. You can see here that both the post texture and blood texture have transferred to the two instances. Imagine, if you will, a large museum in a game that required, say, 30 spotlights. Creating 29 instances of that spotlight and then only changing the original's light values saves a significant amount of time. I create the cones and position them nearby to the posts. These I will texture later. Our next victim is Elise, who thankfully imports wearing some clothes, as does Danielle, whose head is next for the chopping block. Using the Decapicore asset, I hide the bodies of both characters and then remove the clothes. Time to make our model look unalive. Some bloody makeup, a slack jaw and a dead eye stare should be enough. Let's plonk her on a post. The cones are textured with the same image as the post. I can position the cones appropriately above the head, giving the idea that the post has moved through it. Now we move on to Danielle, add some dirt to the face and a spot of blood, not forgetting the loose jaw and rolled up eyes. Let's see how the framing looks and give it a preview render. It's looking good, though I think we need to darken this night scene. There, a simple starry sky. Next, I want to add some light coming from this window. Unfortunately, the asset itself doesn't have the window as a separate surface, as it's all built into one entire side of the church. Not to worry, as I can create a plane, moving this inside of the window and make this an emissive surface. You can turn any surface into an emissive by just changing the emission in the Surface Editor tab to anything other than black. In this case, I chose a red colour. You can also adjust the luminosity, that is, how much light is produced, and even the temperature. Lower numbers give a more yellowed effect, whilst higher numbers will be more blue. Natural daylight is around 55 to 6500. I think this image would benefit from some moonlight, so let's move that oversized disc into view. We need some directional lighting for the heads. I add this via a spotlight set to rectangle shape, both at the front facing them and from behind. Trial and error with setting the luminosity to a value I'm happy with is needed here. Then a final look before rendering. And after some post work, here is the final image. I hope you enjoy.